Good morning. It's Monday, March 13th. And here's something that I never thought about when I was working. In my job, we had clients all over the country, and I was required to visit them at least once a year. So I had the opportunity to fly to many, many places in this country. New York to San Francisco to Los Angeles and Tucson and Chicago and down into the South in North Carolina and South Carolina and Florida even. We had clients all over the country. And it was my job to go and talk to these clients and convince them about the great work we were doing. And we were doing great work. In fact, one of my favorite clients was Sakowitz Department Store in Houston, Texas. And I visited him twice a year. And he told me if I did not bring bagels, I shouldn't come. So that's the kind of relationships I had with all these clients. And it was a wonderful time. I enjoyed every minute of it. And many times I could take my wife with me. And I do a trip a couple times, and once we went to Chicago together, and I stayed there for 2 or 3 days. And the reason I stayed there and she was with me is because from Chicago we then flew to Honolulu because my son was in the Navy and he was stationed in Honolulu. So I made many trips to Hawaii too in my career, and probably that's why I didn't go to Europe that often, because I was always visiting the kids in Honolulu, which was wonderful. Wonderful visits and everything, and they grew up fine, And now I have great-grandchildren. So that's a whole other story. But the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because there are many people who have a fear of flying. And the statistics show that 40% of the people have a fear of flying. And I never had the fear of flying. I never worried about it. I got on the plane, I sat down, and I can tell you in all the flights that I went on, there was really very little problems. And I can only recall 2 times when the flights were delayed and I was stuck in some airport for a long period of time. And one of them was on a trip to Puerto Rico. We came to LaGuardia Airport early in the morning in December because we had a timeshare for the whole Christmas week and New Year's. But the plane was sitting on the runway, but the runway was icy. We had to wait 16 hours at LaGuardia to get on that flight to go to Puerto Rico. So I experienced some bad things in my travel, but I was never afraid of traveling. But as I said before, the reports are that 40% of the people in the United States have a fear of flying. And many of them, it's not a total fear, it's just takeoffs and landings bother a lot of people. And then, of course, there's air turbulence that affects a lot of people. So, you pick your poison. But many people travel anyhow, in spite of the fears. And the statistic has pretty much stayed the same over all the years. It did dip down once in a while to 38%, but it never went higher than 41%. And I guess that's just human nature, because people have a way of imagining the worst. There are some people who cannot be 100% happy 100% of the time. And then there are those who are just born to worry. They worry about everything. And I believe that's part of the situation with the fear of flying. They worry. People start worrying when they get on the plane. It would be really great if most of these people who worry about flying would worry about their driving. Because, more people are killed in automobile accidents than in flight planes. Of course, there's many more autos on the road. We can use that as an excuse. But I think that a little bit of fear of driving would help the population on the ground. In any event, there's only 5% of the population that has a real strong fear of flying, and that's called aviophobia. And it's so severe that they cannot fly. That group of people cannot fly. And every time there's an aviation horror story, like the Lufthansa Airbus that went into free fall over Tennessee after hitting some turbulence, several passengers landed in the hospital. Nobody was killed in that thing. But when those people with aviophobia hear about that, they cannot fly. They cannot fly. And many more people get on their planes who are not ready to fly psychologically. So that every time the craft lurches or something, these people start swallowing and digging their nails into the upholstery, just in case there's the chaos of a landing. Now, many people who fly enjoy an extra drink because they can sleep more, or it takes the tension out of their body while they're flying. And then there are those who won't look out the window. They don't look out the window the whole flight, right? So the extent of this airline fear, this flying fear, is still maintained. 40% no matter what seems to be happening. Now, this fear of flying is largely a big guesswork because the National Institute of Mental Health does not collect data on the fear of flying. So the data that's being collected is being collected haphazardly by interviewing certain people who flew at particular times. And so the statistics remain the same relatively. There's 40% of the people who have no fear of flying. You ask them, they can get on a plane anytime and go anywhere. And then there's the other 40% that have some fear of flying. And then I guess there's 20% that's sitting in the middle and nobody ever talked to them. So, CBS has run some polls and YouGov has run some polls. And the 41% seems to be the standard number of the people who have a fear of flying. And even in the best of times, nearly half the American public is slightly afraid. I think everybody is slightly afraid, or most everybody's slightly afraid when they get on a flight, So, and the thing is, it creeps up on you, too. There are some people that say they went on planes, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, they became afraid. Something triggered them to become afraid. Now, I don't know what that could be. I even lost my luggage on a flight. Does that make me afraid to fly? No. So you can have bad things happen on a flight. And waiting for the plane to take off and stuff like that can be annoying, But you have to look at it positively. You got to get someplace. You got to go. You got to take the flight. It's the easiest thing. Or would you rather drive for 4 days to get someplace? There are plenty of people who might want to do that. And then there are some people who go on Amtrak from New York to Tampa. I did that once. I went on Amtrak from New York to Florida. But that's a story for another time. So I leave you with that. The fear of flying, which I don't have, but which a lot of people do. But the airline industry doesn't seem to be failing that much because of that. It's because of other stupid things. So I'll leave you with that this morning. Have a great day. Bye.